All right. What's up, everybody? This is Jasper. Get paid for your pad with the weekly live stream on YouTube. Just getting set up here, making sure that I'll be able to see the comments of the people that are watching. So I'm gonna put it on my phone right here. Just bear with me 1 second. All right. Are we? Yeah. Okay. Yo, what's up? What's up, everybody? This is Jasper at Get Paid for Your Pad with this week's live YouTube live Ask Me Anything session. I've got a number of questions from the listeners and viewers, so just gonna make sure that everything is going well technically. Okay. Man. I'm not sure if this is working. I should really hire somebody who's good with all this technical stuff. Why can I not see it? I'm supposed to be able to see it. Okay. So I think it's working. I think it's working. I just can't, for some reason, I can't see it myself. I seem to be offline. It's just a little bit. All right. Sweet. I think we're good. So today, I'm going to talk about, first of all, I'm going to talk about a question that I got, which talks about the best places in the world to invest in a short-term rental. That's one question I got from Aleem. Let's see if he's going to join, so he can elaborate a little bit on his question. But his question was essentially, what's the best city in the world to build a short-term rental business / portfolio? Which is a question that I can talk about for a pretty long time. But yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's a question that I get from a lot of people actually. So I'm gonna dive in a little bit. I'm gonna keep my phone here so I can see if people are commenting. Kaleo 1981, what's up, man? Glad you're joined. If you have any questions, let me know. So the first thing, and the most important thing when you start with any short-term rental, in my opinion, is regulations, right? I mean, these days there's just regulations popping up all around the world, and I know several companies who've built out substantial businesses in places like New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, who are now having a lot of trouble and some are having to shut their business down, some are having to make significant changes because of the new regulations that have popped up. And so that's something that you really do not want. And I've experienced this myself as well back in Amsterdam, where I had to sell my apartment because it became literally impossible to run a short-term business there. So regulations is really the first thing that you want to look at. And so, what are, in terms of regulations, what are the best areas? Well, the best areas are where there is, sorry, I'm just trying to get comfortable here. The best areas are where there is regulations in place, but it's a short-term friendly regulation, right? So the local authorities they've already gone through the process of implementing regulations, and they ended up deciding to have a friendly short-term rental infrastructure. And the reason why those areas are the best is because when there's regulations in place, then that means the chance that they're going to make it stricter or implement new strict regulations is much smaller than if there's no regulations at all. So those areas are really the areas that you want to look at first. Secondly, areas where there's no regulations are also an option, but you really want to be careful with those areas, because just because there's no regulations now doesn't mean that there's going to be no regulations in the future. And so if I were to invest in an area where there's no regulations, I would definitely not invest in large urban areas where there's a housing shortage, where there's rent control, stuff like that, because those are the typical areas where people start creating friction with short-term rental owners and stuff, and that's where people start complaining about the rents are too high and there's not enough houses, and so then Airbnb or short-term rental platforms tend to get the blame, and then strict regulations will probably come up in those typically large urban centers. So I would look elsewhere. So what are currently the best cities from a regulatory lens? Okay, so the problem is that because there's so many different cities where different regulations, it's very hard to kind of keep track of what are the best places. Things keep changing all the time as well, and so what I would do is I would start with your area, because you want to get started like in a market that you know, right? So stay close to home, I think is a really good advice, because when you want to get good deals, you want to be able to have some time. Like, for example, let's say you're looking for a good deal, a property to buy and put on Airbnb. You want to make an inventory of homes that are good options, and then they are on the market, so you want to monitor them, right? Because in order to get a good deal, you want to know which are the properties that are on the market for a while. You really want to try and find the motivated sellers that are ready to take a deal, and also being close to the property, it'll be easier to manage it. It'll be easier to find people to cleaners and whatnot, like all the people that you need. So I would say start in your own market. Like, where do you live, right? Start there, and if that market is not a good option, then just go to the markets that neighbor your own market, right? I wouldn't, especially if you're starting out, I wouldn't go too far from home. Now that's very different from what I did myself, but it also depends on your goals, right? So my goals might be very different to what your goals are, right? So my personal goal was to acquire a number of properties in developing countries, and the reason that I chose these markets was because I can't get a mortgage. And also I wasn't living in one place. So if you're constantly moving around, you don't really have that advantage of living in one place and being able to really understand your market, do a lot of research, look at a lot of properties, reach out to landlords and property owners on Craigslist and all these Zillow, all these platforms. Like, if you're moving around constantly, you really don't have that luxury. And so for me, it was, my goal was to find free properties that I could afford, and in locations where I would like to spend time, right? Because I actually want to use my own properties. Like, some other people might just see it as an investment, right? But for me, the goal was really to get these free properties so that I could live and stay in these different properties and kind of move around between them, and at the same time make a good ROI. And so because I couldn't get a mortgage, like emerging markets make a little sense because those markets are typically they're not leveraged, right? So places like Colombia, Thailand, and the Philippines, where I bought my properties, like you can't get a mortgage there. Well, if you can, then you end up paying like 10%, 12% or something. So it doesn't really make sense from an investor perspective. And that means that the market is not leveraged, right? That means that there is a lot of, I'm not competing with somebody who can borrow for like 3 or 4%, right? If I were to buy something in Europe or the US, I'm competing with people that can put 20% down and they borrow the rest at 4%. Right, so the ROI that they're looking for is lower because it's leveraged. If they're making 6% on money that they're borrowing for 3%, then the amount of money that they're making on the 20% that they actually put down is actually that percentage is a lot higher. So I can compete with that. So in non-leveraged markets, I can compete as a cash buyer. You're not competing with people that can borrow for really cheap, and so you're not at a disadvantage. The second reason I bought in developing markets is that the prices are much lower, so I could buy 3 properties instead of 1 with the amount of money that I had to invest, and so that way I'm spreading my risk, which is also an important consideration. So I think those are the major considerations for my situation. Another consideration, because I didn't have time to really get to know the market and spend a year in one location and really try to negotiate great deals with property owners that have properties that I know have been on the market for a long time because I've been following them. Because I didn't have that much time, I ended up going for turnkey properties. So turnkey properties are essentially they're properties that are delivered to you, where all you need to do is turn the key, right? They're furnished, everything is working, it's completely new, and so those are the properties that I went for, and I looked very much at the local market, of course, but not living in that place kind of limits me as to the amount of knowledge that I can gain. But obviously, I looked at hotel prices. I looked at the Airbnb market, like what's the competition like? Is the competition very fierce, or are they not doing a very good job? What are the prices? Obviously, you do that research in order to get an idea of what the ROI could be like. But also, I looked at sort of macroeconomical trends, and also I looked at the microeconomical trends. So what that means is, Colombia, for example, like, do I think in the next 5, 10, 15 years, do I think that Colombia is going to do well economically, right? And also the city where I bought, Cali, do I think that Cali is going to be an up and coming market? And in these other places as well, in Thailand and the Philippines where I bought, the airports had just been upgraded. So that's these are really good signs that there's going to be increased tourism in the near future. So those are kind of the main things that I would look at. But it depends a little bit on your situation, right? What your goal is, if you can get a mortgage, if you live in a market where there's interesting markets nearby. So that's a little bit situational. So for the recent STR Legends conference, so there's a new question from the recent STR Legends conference. Where were the STR Legends operating in markets that surprised you? Yes. Definitely, there was definitely some people that were operating in really interesting markets, and I'd say the main takeaway for me was the idea that people always ask what's the best market. Well, let's just say there is a best market. What happens? Everybody is going to jump on that market, and then is it still going to be a good market? Probably not, right? Because the competition will come in, and so what was really interesting for me to see is that a lot of these the participants were actually not operating in the markets that you would expect on first sight. I did a podcast interview with Scott, and he was one of the participants. And I can let me just share my screen real quick. Um, let's see. This is the podcast that you're looking at right now. It's episode 286 with Scott Glass. So and I highly recommend you listen to this interview, but we can kind of go through what we covered. So he was actually investing in some markets that were very surprising. I remember he talked about a number of properties that he bought in a suburb near Pittsburgh, where he was able to buy some properties for a really good price. Because one of the strategies that Scott uses is he gets the owners to accept a payment plan where he only puts either a small amount of money down, or he literally buys the property with income stream that he will generate in the next 2 to 3 years. And so he literally gets the use of the property already, and then with the money that he makes, he actually pays off the property owner. So that way he's acquired properties without actually having to pay for them upfront, which is really amazing. But he's very successful in these markets that you just would not expect people to be. Like he's in this market like near Pittsburgh, like 45 minutes outside of Pittsburgh, and you would wonder, like, why are people visiting there? And I think that's one of the main lessons learned as well. It's short-term rental guests are not just tourists, right? You don't always have to be in a big city or near a tourist highlight or an attraction. There's a lot of people that have to travel and they have to be in a certain area for work, to visit a conference, like interns, corporate people working, consultants who have to travel because they work for a certain company like during the week. They live in New York and then they work in Orlando or whatever, Miami during the week. And then so they need housing, and obviously there's corporate housing, but there's the point is, like, there's a lot more people that travel, people visiting families, people have to go to a hospital. There's all sorts of reasons that people travel that you wouldn't naturally think of. And so Scott is doing really well in his properties outside of Pittsburgh, and he mainly hosts construction workers, for example. Right, construction workers that they work on the project there, and the thing is, like, with these areas where these unlikely areas, so to speak, the areas that you wouldn't naturally think of, there's not a lot of competition because nobody suspects that you could run like a very profitable business there. So there's not a lot of competition. Plus, the prices of the homes are typically much lower, so you can get a really good deal. I remember Scott was talking about this place that he bought, and he was able to put 10 beds in this unit, and so he has a 10 bedroom, right? And now he rents it out for like $300. That's only $30 per person, right? So that's not a lot of money, but $300 a night is a lot of money if you're able to buy the home for, let's say, like $100,000 or so. Which is definitely possible in these suburbs, in these smaller towns. And so that's where I would start looking. Like, if I was living in the US in a big city somewhere, I would go visit the suburbs, the neighborhoods. I would go to the smaller towns, maybe like near the airport, for example. Airports are always great. There's always people that have to be near the airport. So that's where I would start looking, and those are the areas as well where the regulations tend to be either friendly or there's no regulations in place. So hope that that kind of answers your question. Now, there's one more thing that I wanted to chat about in this live stream, and this is I always look at all these Facebook groups, and there's sometimes, most of the time, the discussions aren't that interesting. There most of the most of the time it's this host venting about what their guest did, and that they didn't read the description and the manual and all that stuff. But sometimes there's a really interesting discussion going on. And I saw this discussion in a group called The Hosting Journey. It's a group by Evelyn Badia. And the question that one of the group members asked was, is it a good idea to have a bunch of people click on your listing in the search results in order to give your listing a little boost? Or I guess she was basically asking people to click on her listing so that you could get a little boost, right? And so there was a discussion going on as to whether that actually helps your listing if you have a bunch of people click on your search snippet. And so there was a bunch of people thought that it would help, and then there was one person, I think she's a business manager at Vacasa actually, which is one of the biggest short-term rental managers that exists, and so I'm assuming that she knows her stuff. But she was saying that it's actually not a good idea to have people click on your listing, because it's not good when you have a lot of clicks. When people click on your listing and they don't book, she was saying that's a negative factor. And so I kind of looked into this a bit because I've done a bunch of podcast episodes where we went pretty deep into this topic. And so, I actually looked at the Airbnb website, and I can pull it up as well, so you can just read with me. I've got it here. All right, so there's an article on the Airbnb website that is called "What Factors Determine How My Listing Appears in the Search Results?" And one of the things that it states is that clicks in the search results. When a listing is shown in search results, we consider it a good sign if a guest clicks on that listing to learn more. To ensure that this is fair for our whole host community, we make sure to only count clicks from different guests. And so it definitely doesn't help if somebody clicks on somebody clicks on your listing multiple times, right? That doesn't work, because they only count different guests. So if you have 10 different people click on your listing, then based on this information, and I'm assuming this information is correct because Airbnb publishes it on their website, you would actually say that it does help. Now, there's another thing that they say here that we have to take into account. Requests from a listing page. We look at how often guests request to book when they look at your listing. We find that successful listings do a good job of helping guests decide to book. So what does this mean? We look at how often guests request to book when they look at your listing. And so the question here is, if the ratio between the people that look at your listing and the people that request to book, if that ratio becomes larger, so let's say, like, hypothetically, let's say you have 500 people click on your listing but then they don't book. Now your listing view to book ratio is going down a lot. And so the question is, would that have a negative effect? Or does Airbnb not look at the ratio, but is it just an absolute number, right? So for example, let's say you have 100 people checking out your listing and 10 people request to book. Is that better than having 10 people request to book and having 200 people visit your listing? Right? So that's the question. If they look at the absolute number, then it wouldn't matter, right? It's just like 10 people requested to book. So we don't know if how Airbnb actually does this, but my guess is that the algorithm is already so complicated that I think I think they're probably not really looking at ratios too much. I think they're probably just tracking like how many people check out the listing and how many booking requests do you get. So my conclusion is kind of that yeah, it's probably a good thing if you have a lot of people click on your listing. Another aspect that we can consider is personalization. So what does personalization mean? Personalization means that if person A looks on Airbnb in the search results and person B looks, they're going to see different listings. And that's based on their historic behavior. So what type of listings have they clicked on in the past? And probably a bunch of other factors. But one thing to consider is that if somebody clicks on your listing, they are then more likely to see your listing in the future because Airbnb knows that they're already interested in your listing because they clicked on it. And so that factor doesn't really help your overall visibility of your listing. If person A clicks on your listing, then person A is going to see it more often, but the rest of the world is not going to see your listing more often just because person A clicked on it, at least not from the personalization perspective. So as a conclusion, if you would ask me, is it a good idea to click on to ask other people to click on your listing in order to get a little bump in the search results? I think the effect is probably going to be quite minimal. And so the question then to me really becomes, do you really want to bother your friends taking their time to click on your listing if it's going to have a pretty marginal effect? And the second thing is this is it's called gaming the system, right? This is definitely gaming the system. And gaming the system is something that I typically try to avoid, for the simple reason that obviously Airbnb doesn't want you to game the system, right? And anything you do that Airbnb doesn't like, there is some risk that they will deactivate your listing, right? There's a lot of listings that get deactivated, and Airbnb doesn't disclose the reason. And so would I really want to risk my account to gain like a very marginal advantage by doing something that the platform is not designed to do for, right? It's essentially, it's like misusing the platform. And so my advice would be to not get into these type of tactics. And I wanted to propose a alternative strategy. So if you do want to ask your friends to help you with your Airbnb listing, instead of trying to game the system and asking them to just do these fake clicks on your listing, I would suggest that you ask them the following. Ask them to do a search in your neighborhood and pretend that they are going to visit your neighborhood as a guest, and then ask them what is their top 5 of the listings in your neighborhood, and then just see and then ask them why, because that's actually really helpful for you as a host, because you can learn. First of all, you can kind of learn what the customer journey is. You can also ask your friends to record their actual the process of them record their screen as they go through this process of looking at listings in your neighborhood, looking at potentially your listing, looking at some other listings, and then making a decision as to where they want to stay. Because I think that's actually something that you can learn a lot from. You can ask them questions like, hey, why did you think this listing is more attractive than mine, right? And they might say, oh, well, the pictures were much nicer, or this listing was priced better, or it looked more appealing, or the whatever it may be that drove the decision process. I think it's very useful to get more insight into this process as a host, so that you can learn how to make your search snippet and your listing look more attractive, and that is going to really give you more traction on Airbnb, and it's also going to help your visibility in the search results as well, because Airbnb wants to show attractive listings, right? They want to show listings that people want to look at, that people want to book. And so I think that's a much better way to have your friends and family help you with your Airbnb listing. Awesome. So I've been talking already for almost half an hour, so I think I'm gonna leave it at this. I'm doing this every week at this time. On Monday, I'm doing this on YouTube. On Wednesday, I'm doing it in the Facebook group Get Paid for Your Pad. So you can join. Feel free to join. Just look for Get Paid for Your Pad on Facebook. You find the group and you can request to join, and I'll approve it so you can be a member of the group. And if you have any questions, feel free to email them at questions@getpaidforyourpad.com. Then I will get the question and I will comment on your question. I will answer your question in a future live event. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this, and see you next time. Bye guys.